Hi, and welcome to the podcast. Welcome to Kitchen Conversations. We've got a pretty simple goal. We're hoping each episode inspires just one person to pick up a pickleball paddle and try the game for the very first time. And today's guest has done that, not for one or two people, but literally for thousands of people. He's also done it behind bars. Roger BelAIr has started a not-for-profit organization called PICL. You'll find out what that stands for in today's episode. But Roger has taken pickleball to prison, where he's teaching inmates the game that you and I love so much. And it's making a big difference. You'll hear about the success of that organization. You'll hear about how many institutions they're involved in. And you're going to come away from this with a totally new appreciation for the game we love. Enjoy Roger BelAIr on today's episode of Kitchen Conversations. Well, Roger, welcome to the podcast, and thank you for being here. I can't tell you how thrilling it is to finally meet. We've been chatting back and forth a little bit for a couple of weeks now, and I wanted to start by thanking you for your generosity in being here and being part of the podcast today.
Oh, thank you, Mike. I'm really looking forward to this. It's a great story, and I love to just share it with other people.
Yeah, it is quite a story, Roger. It really is. I mean, we come into these stories every once in a while in our lives, and you really have to pause. And I really did have to pause when I bumped into yours. When I started the podcast back in January, I started researching and, looking for guests that I thought might make for interesting content. And when I bumped into your story, it was a story that, to be quite frank, Roger, I had a hard time understanding. The passion behind the project and the moment that it happened with that 60 Minutes episode, which is now obviously quite famous, and you've talked about it extensively.
Yeah.
It really touched me. It really touched me in a way that I found quite interesting. Now, I'm in Kingston, Ontario, Canada. Now, at one point, we were the prison capital of Canada. We had a P for W. We had a prison for women. We have some very famous institutions that have made history in the penal system for riots and outbreaks. And so I come from a prison town. And so maybe part of my attraction to your story and interest in your story comes perhaps from growing up here and kind of being maybe closer to that than some others. But I just find the work that you're doing to be beyond fascinating, and I'm excited to talk about it. So thank you again for being here.
Yeah, it's really interesting about life, isn't it? About how you go down different paths and you end up someplace that you say, how in the world did I get here?
How'd that happen?
It wasn't planned, it wasn't expected, but
No.
That's just part of what happens in life.
It does. And, Roger, I think we'll touch on this at some point for sure. One wrong decision, can change your life. One wrong decision, one extra beer at the bar tonight.
Oh,
it's that simple. It's that simple. It really is.
And I've seen that over and over again.
Yeah.
Some really quality people that made a poor choice, and boy, they really impacted their life.
Yeah. Well, listen, we're going to get into all of that and more today, and I really appreciate this. If you don't mind, I would like to break today's conversation into three separate buckets. And bucket number one is I'd like you to give the audience and give myself a brief overview of your background, your professional career, Roger. I think it's important for us to understand the work that you did prior to the work that you're doing. And the second bucket is just to hear your passion for the game of pickleball. I'd like to touch on that briefly. Did the game find you, or did you find the game? And then subsequently, and most importantly, the work that you're doing with PICL. And I can't wait to get into that. So can we start by indulging us in a story about your background? I know you've got a business background, and I come from a small business background, but a business background nonetheless. So could we please start with a bit of a story on that?
Well, one thing we have in common is we both came from a family that had a small business, and and I think that's something we share, and it gives us a perspective about the challenges of running a small business. I decided to become a bean counter, a banker, and I went to work for Seattle First National Bank, which was the largest bank in the Pacific Northwest, and I did quite well. And I ended up running personal banking for the head office, and so that was my career. But Mike, I was really driven when I was young, and maybe because we didn't have much money growing up, I wanted to achieve a certain amount of financial security. Not in the materialistic sense of buying this and that, but just creating a little bit of again, financial security. So I started a small business on the outside, an investment company. We were very blessed. We were right place, right time. And believe it or not, in 1984, this investment company I had with one other guy ended up being profiled on the cover story of Money Magazine.
No way. Well, it,
Yeah.
it it turned into something pretty special then, didn't it?
Well, it really did. We had a good idea, but we did make some right. And, publicity changes lives. It really moves the needle. And so I had this banking career, but all of a sudden I'm making more money on the outside. And so I decided to do my investments full time. But because that Money Magazine article, I got a call from Doubleday out in New York, and they said, "Have you thought about writing a book?" Well, my first my first reaction, I don't even write my mother. I can't
Right.
write a book.
What am I doing writing a book? I can't write a
Yeah,
letter.
that's right. And they said, "Well, we can get you some help. Some of these athletes are not real capable." And so I sat down, and you're old enough to remember this. It was called a typewriter.
I had
P
one. I
R.
had
Yeah.
one. Yeah.
And so I punched this thing out on a
Wow.
typewriter and sent it in and said, "This is good. This
Wow.
is good." Well, we'll fine tune it a little bit.
Hmm.
It came out. It sold quite well, and then American Management Association approached me and said, "Write a book for how to borrow money from a banker." Well, that's a good novel idea. I wrote that. It sold quite well, and then it's just life of what some things that can happen. I run into a guy at a party, and we're sitting there chatting, and he has kind of a famous name, and I told him what I did, and he said, "Let me introduce you to my agent. You should be speaking at business conventions." Well, I could speak. I didn't know I could write, but I could speak. His name was Vince Lombardi Jr. and Vince did, and we're friends today. And so my writing career evolved into a professional speaking career. I'd go to different business conventions. I'd tell the same jokes over and over. And it's a lot easier, Mike, to find a new audience than it is a new speech.
It sure is. It sure
Right?
is. Yeah, that's right.
And so I did that
Yeah.
for years. So that's my professional background.
My goodness, Roger, what a story. I mean, we could end the podcast here and it's going to be terrific. I mean, thank you for that. Yeah, I love that you go back to your roots though as a kid and that the desire and the drive and the passion wasn't about the money. And I love that. And I'll tell you why. We've always said to our boys, we have a 28-year-old we're immensely proud of and a 25-year-old that we're immensely proud of. They're good people, they're good humans, and they're doing good things. But we always said to the boys, it's passion before paycheck. And
Absolutely.
we drilled that into them, Roger. We drilled it into them as a family-owned business and, just sort of things that mom and I believed in. And I'm proud to tell you they both followed that path, and they're both doing something they're passionate about. And the interesting part of that is the paycheck's starting to come along, and it's a
Yeah.
wonderful story. And, we all chase the rainbow. It's funny, you can make 25,000 a year. I remember my very first job was $2.15 an hour, and I thought I'd hit the big time as a kid, a teenager making that kind of money, and subsequently worked my way through life and got more lucky than good. But you money's never the answer. It's just never the answer, and so I'm so happy to hear you kind of touch on that just a little bit in your opening dialogue. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. I'll just say the lack of money can cause unhappiness, but more money doesn't necessarily cause more happiness. It no matter who you are, your values, principles, um, that's what's really important, and having that passion for exactly what you're doing. That's where satisfaction in life comes from. Because when I was a banker and also some of my friends, I know people with a lot of money. It does. I like to say money makes people somebody bigger what they already are. They're a good person, they'll be a better person. The jerk, they'll be a bigger jerk. Anyway, enough
What
about
a
that.
no, great way to look at it for sure. I appreciate you sharing your thoughts on that. Well, that's wonderful. Well, let's jump into the second part of the conversation because I want to save as much time as I have with you for the most important part of this, which is PICL. But tell me about the game of pickleball, Roger. Tell me, did the game find you? Did you find it? And do you remember that moment you stepped on the court for the first time? Because I think you and I are not meeting today and we're not talking today if it's not for pickleball. So all of the work that you're doing with PICL doesn't happen without pickleball likely. I mean, it may have happened with something else, but we'll assume, pickleball gave it a bit of a helping hand along the way. So tell me about your love affair with pickleball.
Yeah, well, I started playing about 15 years ago, and they introduced it at the gym, and I said, here's something that maybe my wife and I can do together." And like most people who step onto the court, they don't know much about it, but all of a sudden they fall in love. You know, it's such a terrific game, and I was very fortunate because growing living in Seattle, I got to know the son of one of the founders, and through David McCollum, I met his dad.
Oh,
And
okay.
Dave and Barney was a special guy. Barney was
Mm.
one of those guys he either likes you or he didn't.
Okay,
And
black and white. Yeah, no question
uh,
mark. Sure.
he was a big man, and we just connected, and we spent a lot of time together. He was in a retirement center, and I'd see him maybe once every 6 weeks or something like that. And of course, what we did was we talked about pickleball. So I learned so much about the history of the game because of Barney. Like where did they really come from, and why pickleball as compared to other sports? And he'd say it's because it's the most social sport ever created. And we could spend the whole hour talking about Barney, but uh, but that was really the start of it. And then, coming from a professional speaking background, I said, this is easy to teach. I mean, it's so fun. All you have to do is really show up and be enthusiastic to teach the game, right? The magic's not in the instructor, the magic's in the game. And I've said that many, many times. So I started teaching it, and locally at the one local gyms and for the parks department. And believe it or not, right now I've taught about 5,000 people. So yeah,
It's something else, isn't it? I talked to a gentleman in the UK a couple days ago, Roger, who started a Facebook group page called Senior Pickleball Tips. You may be aware of it. And Patty made a great point. He said that for him, he thinks part of the magic that we're talking about today is the length of each game. So unlike tennis or golf or any other sport, really, it takes a long time to complete a game. Whereas with pickleball, especially in a social environment that is where I'm most comfortable, I assume you are as well. We do a
right.
paddle rotation. We're in for maybe 11, 12, 15 minutes. We come off, we're standing on the court. You and I are chatting. We're getting to know each other. You're telling me about your story. I'm telling you about mine, and we get to know each other and we become friends. And I think his point about how quickly the game starts and ends is a major component to the success of its, of the core of the game in and of itself. It was an interesting perspective.
Without a doubt. But a key part of that is you're on the sidelines waiting to go in, and you have all these conversations, and then you go to the court so much that you find you have a whole new group of friends, and you're spending a lot of time with them, and they're good people.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they really are. And there's such a blend of people too. We talked just briefly about, people's success in life. You can be out there with anybody and anyone. You really never know who you're standing next to. And the game becomes a bit of an equalizer. We're all just there to have a good time. Everybody's racing to get to 11 first. We're trying hard to stay out of the no volley zone and try to get to 11. So the camaraderie that happens within the game, you become instant partners. There's no hesitation at all. You just jump right in. So how often do you get to play? Are you playing often, or are you just
I
simply too
play
busy,
about
or?
three. I no, I play about three, 4 times a week normally.
Good
Yeah.
for you. Yeah. Well, I get as much as I can, but I started curling this year, and I found some parallels between the two sports. Interestingly enough, camaraderie on the ice. Game's not particularly long, but certainly longer than pickleball. But yeah, the social side of curling and the social side of pickleball are well aligned. So yeah, well, it's great. Well, your chance to meet one of the originators.
Yeah, but one of the things that we're talking about the conversations, but also I like to point out with pickleball the amount of laughter. You know, you, you go by a pickleball court and it sounds like a comedy club out there, doesn't it? Yeah, that that doesn't happen in other sports. Tennis players don't laugh; they grunt. You know.
Very serious. Very serious. Very.
Yeah,
We've got no time for fun. Stop that. If you want to
yeah,
have fun, go play with the pickleball people.
sure, absolutely.
Yeah. Listen, I've met a lot of people, as you have, obviously, in coaching and teaching, 5,000 people. But I got to be really frank about this, and I'm not over exaggerating this. I've met, maybe on one hand, the number of people through pickleball that I don't want to have a whole lot to do with.
Yeah.
Everybody I've met has been, for the most part, quite wonderful. So, yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that side of it. I think it's a great game. I'm glad you're able to get on the court, 3 times a week. I think that's terrific. And, motion is lotion. My physiotherapist always says. So, we've got to keep going. We got to keep getting off the couch and getting out there and socializing, and pickleball does all of that for us. So that's really terrific. Yeah, I love that. Well, listen, let's jump into and I hope I'm saying this correctly. Perhaps should have clarified it, but I assume it is PICL, or do you refer to the organization that you created as Pickle?
My wife and I watched, when we have for 30 years, 60 Minutes on Sunday night. Leslie Stahl had a segment on Cook County Jail in Chicago. And as you can imagine, what a challenge it is to run a place like that. They got about 80,000 men and women that go through there every year, a standing population about 8,000. There's 50 major gangs in Chicago. I mean, it's not Kansas, you know? And, and, and I'm watching this segment, and the people are just sitting around. They're watching TV, they're playing cards. And I say to my wife, they should be playing pickleball. They get exercise. Um, they learn some life skills like being a good teammate. And she gave me kind of a polite nod. She has a media background. And a couple of minutes later, I said to her, I'm going to write the guy that runs that place, Sheriff Dart, and I'll go back there on my own dime. I'll teach those guys the game.
No kidding.
And again, with her media background, she got an eye roll. Or, one of those longs. You've been married for a long time. You can relate to what I'm saying. And yeah, and said, Roger, he hears from kind of a lot of kooky people. Don't be disappointed if he doesn't get back to you.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, this was 2017. Pickleball wasn't popular then like it is now. Gets this letter, never ever heard of pickleball, puts the letter on the side of his desk. And that night, over dinner, he has 3 kids, says, I got a letter from this guy in Seattle, something about balls and pickles. 10-year-old daughter puts her hands on her hips and says, Dad, I'll tell you about pickleball.
No way.
And if it wasn't for that little girl, you and I wouldn't be talking today. All
Isn't
right?
that something?
Yeah.
How
Yeah.
did she know
So,
about pickleball, Roger? Did you ever
I
follow
don't
that
know.
through? You're not sure. You
I,
just know that was the story. Wow.
that was his story. And so anyway, he had one of his staff members reach out to me and said, "Well, are you for real? And will you pay your own expenses?" And yes, and yes, and you'll bring all the equipment, yes. And so it happened.
Wow. Roger, what was it about that moment? I mean, you could have been out of the room. You could have not caught that episode of 60 Minutes. The warden, or, the daughter, like so much had to happen. What, in your reflection on it now that you've had some time, what do you think it was about that moment that just sparked that interest in you?
Well, modesty aside, I'm kind of an outside the box thinker. I I'll do things that other people would say, well, maybe someday I'll do that. But that's somewhat indicative of who I am, is to see something and say, I'm going to do that. I'm going to try that. And so I'm not really surprised that I wrote him. I am somewhat pleased that certainly that he wrote back, but I was sincere. I was coming from the heart when I mentioned that, and so it just things kind of just fell into place. But because I took the first step.
Wow. Now, listen, in my research, I understand that, Cook County, obviously, uh, a special starting point for the program. It's growing extensively, and we'll talk a bit about that today. But tell me about that very first visit. And then subsequently, how did you come up with the 4 rules that you applied in that situation? Tell me about that.
Well, I took an Uber up to Cook County Jail, and I'm from Seattle, but is a city, but it's not that big as compared to someplace like Chicago or New York. And I get out and it says maximum security division 10. And I look around and this thing is huge. Cook County Jail is the size of about 70 football fields. They have different locations. And all of a sudden reality hit. I mean, I had never ever been in a prison before. The closest I ever came, I had my car towed once because it was illegally parked. That was it. All right. So my heart goes up to my throat, and I said, God, I'm over 70 years old. What am I doing here? But, I can't turn around then. And so I go through clearance, and shortly thereafter, I find myself in front of 25, maybe 28 guys that had been charged with either murder or attempted murder. And I thought what I'd do is just give them a little background about how the game started with Joel Pritchard,
Yeah.
and it's starting to grow. And well, they had no interest at all. I mean,
Just
pickleball, I might as well be saying tiddlywinks. You
sure.
know, they got up, they went to drinking fountain. They wouldn't even make eye contact. And my I didn't know what to do. I thought of my wife's comment that, "Are you sure you want to do this?" I thought of my dog. I don't know why I thought of my dog. I thought about I might be going back that night to Seattle.
Yeah.
Not knowing what to do, I said, well, let's hit the courts. So I cut off my presentation. They grabbed a paddle. They ended up out on the courts. And I would say maybe 15 minutes.
Mm.
15, you know what OG stands for?
Not
Old
exactly.
guy.
Old
Old
guy.
guy.
Oh,
I went from old guy to either bro or dude.
just like that.
Just like that. They
Wow.
knew nothing about the rules. All they had was these wooden paddles hitting the ball over the net. But they turned in the best way I can describe it is like third graders out on the playground. They weren't in prison anymore. They were
Right.
someplace else. There was so much laughter, just like what we all have as far as laughter.
Yeah.
But when you take 25-year-old men, that's they're macho. They're trying to hit it as hard as they can, of course, which is
Sure.
fine. Uh, but all of a sudden, they listened to every single word I said. I became a Pied Piper. All right, and maybe it comes from my professional speaking background. Is I'm somewhat of a storyteller, and so I like to teach by kind of taking it one step at a time, tell a little bit of story, do some practicing, that type of thing. And in pickleball, I said, well, there's really only 4 rules. I mean, you can learn this game after breakfast, and by lunchtime, you're going to be pretty good because there's only 4 rules. Rule number, no, rule number 1 is I said, explained you had to hit the ball underhanded. And all right. And why that came into effect. Rule number 2 is the 2 bounce rule. Rule number 3 is how the kitchen was developed and designed because of for reasons that you obviously know. And then when I taught them scoring, well, they got all that down. It's very easy to pick this thing up. You can pick it up in an hour. And and so we played a mini game to 7. And boy, are they excited. They're jabbing at each other, they're poking each other in the ribs. And I said, guys, how many rules are there? Some guys said 3, one guy said 5, the rest of them said 4. What's the 4th rule? Well, you haven't told us yet. So I said, well, come on in so everybody can hear me. We're standing at the net. So we're in almost like a football huddle. And I said, all right, what we have here is we have the gold medal winners and we have the people that came in second place. And so one of the rules in pickleball is after the game, you meet up at the net and you have a group hug.
Group hug. So you said that to them. How did that
You
go?
could hear a pin drop.
Roger.
This brought everybody back to reality. A group hug. You got to realize some of these guys have not been hugged in years. You got to realize what the population is like. Everything is very macho inside a prison. You lead with your fists, and you got some idiot that's talking about a group hug. So I waited a few seconds, and the look on their faces was priceless. I reached up over the net. I had them put their paddle up. We tapped paddles, and I said, guys, that's a group hug. It's one of the 4 rules of pickleball, and you will follow it.
Good for you. But
Boy, I made it
Roger,
through that.
yeah,
That
I'm going to use the word courage there because here you are, you pulled up to the front door, you've maybe thought twice about what you just put yourself into. You go through clearance, you get to this point where you're explaining this to them.
Yeah.
And then you have the courage to say group hug in that
All right.
environment. I mean, I got to tell you, that's that really speaks to your character. That is a wonderful part of the story. My goodness.
Isn't that one part of the story? And it really wasn't planned. I mean, it just kind of evolved. But it's again typical of kind of a little bit of who I am is a little bit off the wall as far as coming up with an idea like that. And and since that time, and we're going to talk about what's happened since then. But every time I've taught a group of people how to play on the inside, I use those four same rules, and it's just wonderful. Anyway, on this story, I was there a week, and I've been was back to Chicago 3 times. The last time was there was a sports reporter for USA Today to do a story for the sports page, and I thought Mike, it went well. You know, he talked to me, he talked to uh, leadership, he talked to some of the inmates, of course, and he calls me up a couple days later and says, Roger, I just don't know how to tell you this, but well, it's not going to be on the sports page. And man, my heart just dropped. You know, I told my nosy neighbor, I told the guys at the gym, I'm going to have, well, I'm saying, well, why did they kill the story? I mean, I thought it was a good story. And he kind of chuckles. He says, well, the editors read the story and they're going to put it on the front page.
Oh my.
Right.
Wow. Wow. Good news. Really good news.
Really good news. The
Wow.
main column, you remember back when the USA Today had that main column down on the front page? They put it on Friday, which was the busiest day for buying newspapers. Um, and once again, publicity moves the needle, and it also changes lives. And one of the things I want to point out about that article, and anybody can pull it up online, you know, is that by Googling my name and USA Today, I'm sitting there on the bench with an individual, and he's pointing there out to the court. And I'm paraphrasing, but this is basically what it says. He's saying to me, Roger, look out there on the court. Roger looks out in the court. You just see some guys, many of them swinging and miss, just like the rest of us. A lot of laughter, but I don't say anything in particular. He says, you just don't understand. You're from Seattle. We have 50 major gangs in Chicago. Many gang members will not talk to other gang members. It's just the way it is. Before pickleball. But you look out there on the courts right now and you see gang members playing with and against each other.
Wow. Roger, what a moment. Like what a moment. And for you to not and clearly how could you understand the depth and breadth of that moment, but to that individual seeing this unfold, it's almost a miracle. I mean, I don't know what other word to apply to it, but they're probably thinking this would never have happened. Like it shouldn't be happening. The fact that it was happening, it shouldn't be happening, but it is happening because of pickleball.
That's
Wow.
exactly right. And it's a moment certainly that I'll never forget. And you know, it takes me back to being in the corporate world where we used to have sensitivity training.
Yeah,
And we'd
okay.
bring people into a room and everybody would say the right thing and then they'd leave and maybe some changes would be made and maybe they wouldn't as far as their outlook and philosophy of toward life. But you compare that to something that people voluntarily come together that won't even talk to each other. And then all of a sudden they do an activity where they're laughing together.
Yeah. Can you imagine? It's almost a love story. And I'm careful when I say that, and I'm not trying to be difficult on that or corny, but if you go back to the day that the game they were there, the kids were busy, everybody that loves pickleball knows the story about Bainbridge Island, and if they'd only known what they were doing in that moment, if the founders of the game who had put this all together and came up with the rules and designed the no volley zone and the size of the court and the paddles and if they could, just imagine if they could see that happening and unfolding, just, that moment for them would be just, beyond description.
Well, some of the family members, of course, are still around, and I've been over to the original court more than once and played with it, and we talked about this. And I, you know, I was, I really felt close to Barney. You know, like I said, I like to say friendships are kind of found rather than made. you could work next to somebody for 20 years and never get to close to them. And other times you could just kind of meet somebody casually and it really clicks. And I just wish that he and Joe were around to see what's happened.
Yeah, well, I had a chance to talk to Steve Peranto a few days ago, and of course, Steve was a big part of the early days of pickleball and played in that 1976 bicentennial tournament, and it's just a great legacy of play and being an advocate for the game. It was a real treat, but those guys would appreciate this on a much deeper level, because they were there when it began. They really were, Roger. So, well, that's wonderful. So from that moment, so that all goes very well, better than expected, I would assume. And tell me how it evolves into where we are today with the organization and, your hopes and dreams for the future of it.
Yeah, well, from that, one of the things that came out of that was disciplinary problems on the inside dramatically started being reduced. Guys
Okay.
wanted to play so much that they behaved themselves because the rule is if you get
Wow.
into trouble, you can't play.
Sure.
And then I started getting calls from other places like, well, Rikers Island in New York City. They have 100,000 people that flow through there every year. When I left, the deputy warden says, we're going to spread this out throughout the entire facility. Um, and that was the deputy commissioner. San Quentin.
Mm.
Uh, San Quentin had more people on death row than any other place in the Western Hemisphere.
Wow.
I get a call from the warden who wants a Zoom call. We set that up. And I say to the warden, I said, Warden, let me just give you a little background about the benefits of pickleball on the inside. And he says, Roger,
Mm.
I've done my homework. When can you be here?
That was it.
That was it.
He was ready. He knew. He understood. Isn't that
Yeah.
remarkable?
Yeah.
Well, Roger, what about all of this in the broader sense caught you off guard? Was there one part of this story so far that you just didn't expect that was a real benefit? Like, I mean, did you expect the buy-in that quickly? How did you kind of come to grips with how, I mean, this had gone better than you could have ever imagined, I would think.
Yeah. How it's scripted. I just kind of continued to pinch myself, not because of me, but because I've heard so many stories on the
Mhm.
inside and I realize how it's changing lives. Being on the outside, people that say pickleball's changed my life. Well,
Yes.
that's nothing compared to some of the stories I've heard on the inside about how it brings people together, how it reduces disciplinary problems.
Yeah.
And I had a conversation recently with the head of recreation for uh, the state of California prison system. And she says, Roger, you know what? I think that the most important aspect of pickleball is what it does once somebody gets out.
Okay.
And first of all, I just kind of pulled back a little bit because I know what tremendous improvement it's making in the lives of so many on the inside. And so
Mm.
I said, well, explain that to me. She says, our recidivism rate in this country is a disgrace. It's about 65%, as compared to some place like Norway, which is 15%.
Okay.
We're, do- we're doing all kinds of research about what does it take to get somebody to get out and stay out. And three things are needed. First of all, they need a job. They need income, right?
Hmm.
Well, yet a year after getting out, about half the inmates are still looking for work. Second of all, they need support, and that normally comes in the form of family. Some families are good, some have challenges. But the third thing they need, she says, Roger, is community.
Ah.
Bingo. Somebody can pick up a paddle, they can go down to the local courts, it can be on a first name basis. They're going to make new friends, new
Mhm.
relationships, and it takes them out of that routine that they were involved in before they went inside. Wow.
Yeah. I just want to let that land for a moment because it's remarkable that that would be one of the pillars of,
Yeah.
success in helping these find a new pathway, finding these folks, a new way to get on with their lives. And that's
But you,
probably,
oh, I'm sorry, but you can see how it all fits together.
yeah. Yeah, it's something else. I'm so taken by the story and I'm just so taken by the impact of the game that, a game I just picked up a few years ago for fun, had never until I ran into your story to think about the impact that it's having, and I would make an assumption, Roger, that the success that you've had with this program and the benefits that it's delivering, there's got to be more out there happening with pickleball than maybe you and I are even aware of. And it could be happening on the other side of the world, but there could be something so positive about this. And I can't think of another sport that could possibly have filled the bill in the way that pickleball has done this for you and for these guys.
Yeah, well, speaking of the other side of the world, just yesterday I was profiled in a media online in Vietnam. All right. Yeah. But let me go back a little bit because I want to fill this in on what happened after I ended up like in New York, and then I was asked to go down to Chicago, um, not Chicago, but Florida. Is people started contacting me and said, "This is terrific. I got it. I get it. You know, I understand how much this can help." And I have a prison right down the road, and I'd like to introduce the game at that prison. Will you tell me what to do? And I say, I love to tell people what to do. Sometimes I like to tell people where to go, but I'll give you guidance on what to do. And like I said, it's the easiest game in the world to teach. All you got to do is show up and be enthusiastic. All right. So all of a sudden, I had 5 people doing that and 10. And then a woman out of Connecticut contacted me and says, well, let's form a nonprofit to support this. Sarah Gersten. And what we did, we called it PICL for Pickleball for the Incarcerated Community League. Well, all of a sudden, it just starts growing and growing, and we got more publicity. And right now, we're in 25 states. We're at 81 different facilities, and there's 150 people teaching on the inside.
Roger, what a track record. And put a time frame on this for those listening again, from the moment you were in Cook County
Uh,
until where you are today?
2017. It's been less than 10 years.
Wow. Less than a decade, you've accomplished all
Yeah.
of this. Well, congratulations. Congratulations on all of that. That must just warm your heart. It
Well,
must just all the success that you had in life, and maybe part of the reason I wanted to draw you into that conversation early was I had a strong sense through the research I did for the show that you'd had a very successful business career. And I wonder how you measure that against the success that you've had with
well,
PICL.
this is
How do you square the circle
this
on
is
that?
obviously much more satisfying. I'm proud of my career and my monetary success, but I think our society places way too much emphasis on that, on materialism and trying to impress your neighbor. What's important is if you can put something back into society and make the world a better place. And I've really been able to do this through pickleball, or pickleball has done it for me, of of knowing that I've helped so many people, and continually I get letters and comments from different people, and that both inside and outside. I mean, like again, like I know you can really relate to the people on the outside that says this has helped me. But like one inmate said to me, he says, I'm sure they enjoy it on the outside, but on the inside, we really need it. And those 3 hours a week that I got to play on the inside, he says, I'm not on the inside. I'm free because all I'm doing is focusing on hitting that ball over the net.
Yeah. Well, and I think, another part of the game, Roger, that certainly has lent itself to all of this and the success that you've had is just the ease of access into it. And to your point earlier, it's a quick game to learn. It's a quick game to set up. I mean, that all of it, the combination of everything that is pickleball just certainly all came together and kind of dovetailed into this being such a great success story. Well, good on you. So we're sitting here in the moment. It's 2026, early 2026. What are the future plans looking like for PICL between, say now and the end of this year and then maybe beyond those borders? What are the hopes and dreams of your organization today as it relates to what you're doing?
Well, I'm just kind of letting it grow organically, and that's kind of the way I am as compared to setting goals and wanting to accomplish this or that. I can tell you that the warden at San Quentin, when he retired recently, he told me that the day I showed up at San Quentin was one of the top 5 highlights of his entire career. I can also tell you that in my conversation with him, I said, where do you see pickleball going? And he said, right now, the number one sport on the inside is basketball. because so many of the kids grew up playing basketball. But he says the way basketball is played on the inside is a contact sport. And there's so many injuries that some prisons want to ban it. They want to get rid of it altogether because the way it's played. He says you compare that to pickleball, where everybody can play it, everybody can learn it in an hour or two, everybody can go out on the court and have fun. He said pickleball will be the number one sport played on the inside. And I certainly agree with that. I mean, you just look at it's. I had an interview a while back with a reporter from the Boston Globe. He said pickleball is the fastest growing sport in the history of this country. And you just think about that and why it's just so logical that it will grow tremendously fast on the inside. So we're in 81 different facilities. I think a year ago we were like in 45. And
Wow.
yeah. And
Has there been, yeah, sorry, Roger, I was going to ask, has there been any sort of endeavor throughout the program that you've undertaken that just didn't quite work out the way you'd hoped it was? I mean, has anyone ever said no to
oh,
you
sure.
as far as trying to bring pick? They have, yeah. So it hasn't always been a home run as far as that goes. There's been a bit of pushback in certain
No,
areas.
there's prisons are very bureaucratic. All right. As you can imagine.
Okay.
And think about the type of person who wants to go to work in a prison. It's a very negative
Right.
environment. The pay's lousy, it's dangerous,
Mhm.
you know. And so we certainly have had facilities say, "Oh, we tried things like that before and they don't work." All right.
Yeah.
And there's also a segment of our society, as we both know, right now in 2026, our country is very polarized as far as on the political aspect.
Yeah.
And there's a number of people that say, "Hey, they're there to be punished. They're not there to have fun." And I can identify with where they're coming from. But what happens is pickleball reduces disciplinary problems on the inside. It gets better results with a carrot than a stick. And so
Yeah.
if you have something where you can improve the problems on the inside, reducing the violence, making it easy for the correction officers, isn't that a benefit? So,
Yeah.
so there's always, but there'll always be people that say just by hearing pickleball and playing a game on the inside that they're against it.
Hmm.
So there's hurdles, but it's doing so much good that the good's overcoming the bad.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
clearly. Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, Roger, congratulations on all of that. I mean, the accomplishments to date, and I'm sure what the future holds it's just a remarkable story. It's
Thank you.
remarkable. Tell me, tell me about the documentary. Tell me where that fits into the broader picture.
Well, and it's going to be great. Um, let's see. About 3 years ago, I was asked to do a tour from Florida. Florida has the third largest population of inmates behind Texas and California. And the Washington Post assigned a reporter to follow me for a few days. And after that article came out, a producer out of Hollywood contacted me, Daniel Ostroff, and says, "I'd like to do a documentary about you." And so we've been working together for the last 3 years, and maybe you can put some information on the documentary in your footnotes, if you would. And it's called Pickleball in Prisons, where he's been, geez, I don't know how many sites with me, maybe 10, 11, filming, and has many, many hours and just some tremendous footage. And of course, an awful lot of it is interviewing staff and interviewing inmates as far as what the game's doing on the inside.
That's just terrific. Well, I think it's a great testament to the legacy of the work that you've done, Roger. I'm so glad they're doing that, and what a great experience for you to have that
And
as well.
well, and Daniel's a terrific guy. He's great to work with, and I'm really looking forward to that coming out. We have a couple of trailers coming out so far. We're not exactly sure when it will be released.
Yeah, well, he has been in contact with me, thank you, and we will absolutely make sure that all the show notes include all the information that that you and he would like to have shared,
Perfect.
and we'll do a good job with that for sure. So, Well, Roger, I'm careful with the clock. We're pushing up against that 47-minute mark, so I'm going to be very, very careful and very quick here at the end. But was there anything that I didn't get to today? I had a lot of questions, and I really didn't want to turn this into a Q&A. And your speaking background and your personality, you're just such an easy guy to fall in love with. And, your story is amazing. And I'm so pleased to have had this chance. But was there anything we didn't touch on today that you really think we should have maybe talked about for a moment?
You asked such excellent questions. You really did. And you really covered the broad perspective of what was happened and where it's going. But it's kind of hard to put into words some of the experiences that I've had on the inside. And I'll just share one. Is I was at one prison and a guy had a couple, well, either magazines or newspapers, something like that. And he comes up to me and he introduced himself. And he said, Roger, I've been following you in your career, and I've been praying that you'll come to our prison. And today you're here. Will you autograph these for me?
No kidding.
And how does my heart not go up to my throat when I think of him and him telling me that my mission of coming to him, he's been praying for, and then I'm there.
Yeah. It's just, it's such a story. There's just nothing else out there like it, Roger. And I'm so glad that the publicity that you're obviously garnering from all this and the hard work, I just give you such a pat in the back for this and your organization. It takes a village to put this together. And, it needed to start. It needed a spark. And my father-in-law used to say that somebody's got to light the fire, but somebody's got to keep putting wood on it. Like, we can start the fire. Somebody's got to put wood on it. It's going to go out. So I applaud you for all of that. And I think you must have a great team behind you that is, really tied into this in a way that just, keeps it going and keeps it moving. And I wish you and the group nothing but continued success. And I'm so blessed that you were willing to be a part of this small podcast. And I hope in some way we can share this story, and we will share this story. And so thank you again for being here. It's been a wonderful conversation.